In this video, I'm gonna show you how to get those really good shots when you're using a gimbal, because it's like when you're first buying a gimbal, it's really hard knowing how to actually operate a gimbal, but I'm gonna try to help you along the way so that you can get some really cinematic shots really fast. And check this out, because this is probably the coolest thing that I've seen this year. Okay, so you just bought your first gimbal, you just put your camera on there, and you are just like eager to get out there and start shooting different videos. But there is a couple of techniques that you need to know when you're operating a gimbal to get those really smooth shots, and that is exactly what I'm going to try to cover in this video. Before we actually get to the shooting part with your gimbal, one of the absolute most important thing, in my opinion, is definitely going to be the way that you balance your camera on your gimbal, because I see a lot of people out there that are just putting on the camera and then balance it until it's like okay, and doing that is going to put an unnecessary strain on the gimbal's motor, and it's probably going to make your gimbal to break a lot sooner than would otherwise. So that is why I think that when you're balancing your gimbal, you want to make sure that you can just like balance it until perfection, and you can leave it in any place and the camera is gonna stay there because you have balanced it so good. There's also going to be a lot easier for you to get the shots that you want to have, because the motors will not struggle when you are getting those kind of like really low shots, or when you're moving forward, or when you're moving the gimbal fast, especially if you're in sports mode. Because if you're in sports mode with the DJI Ronin, the motors are working like super fast, and if your gimbal is not properly balanced, it's going to be a risk that your camera will actually take some of the beating if the motors fail or if something fails with the gimbals. And I'm gonna show you a how do you call it, a gimbal hack. So as you probably know, I do have this Manfrotto PL, what is it called, like PL200 plate, I think, and I've actually put this quick release plate on my gimbal as well. So instead of having this really long thing right here, I just put the camera in that quick release and then I'm done. So I'm gonna drop a link to those things down below, so you can just go in there, you can order them yourself and then streamline your workflow. Huh? Okay, so probably the most important thing when you are operating a gimbal is going to be to do slow movements. Unless you're shooting something that is really action-packed, you want to try to move as slowly as you possibly can. And when it comes to walking with the gimbal, you don't want to walk regularly just holding the gimbal like that, straight up walking down the pier or whatever it is that you're walking on, because that is going to give you this like bobbing motion up and down that you don't want to have in your shot. And the reason for that is because we are not stabilized on that axis. So what you want to do instead is that you want to try to walk as smoothly as you possibly can, and that means basically like keeping your knees bent and walking heel to toe, because that will give you the most professional looking footage when you're using a gimbal. So when it comes to getting those really good gimbal shots, there's like a couple of more things to think of than just how to operate the gimbal, and one of them is definitely going to be the use of foregrounds. And this is something that I tell you in a lot of my videos, but foreground will make your movement way more apparent than if you don't have any foreground. Say for example that I want to get a shot of this, I don't know what that is, like a castle, house, old building. If I do not use a foreground when I shoot this, it's not going to look as interesting that if I were to use a foreground. I'm going to show you an example. And a couple of gimbal moves that I always use, no matter what kind of gimbal it is that I use or what kind of video it is that I shoot, is gonna be these moves. The first one is basically gonna be having your gimbal in a underslung mode, trying to stay as close to the ground as you possibly can, because doing this will give you a way more like interesting perspective than if you were to hold the gimbal like slightly off the ground. And when you have the foreground in there, it's gonna look really good. So try to frame your shots really good using the rule of thirds, and that will give you some really interesting shots that is going to look really professional. Another move that I really like to get those really good shots is definitely going to be like trying to stay close to the ground and then doing a fake jib shot upwards to make sure that you like reveal what is behind the actual foreground that you have in your video. And when you're getting these kind of shots, it's going to be easier for you if you set your camera to manual focus, because then the camera will not like try to grab focus off the foreground and then hunt to the background. And when you're using manual focus for a gimbal shot like this, then you want to try to like start off with the framing that is going to be your end frame. Make sure that you set the manual focus so that everything there is in focus, and then move back and then do the move all over again. I am personally using the DJI Ronin S, which has 3 different modes that you can configure and make exactly the way you want to have them. And what I've done is that I've set my second mode to be like the main mode that I'm shooting in, and I'm leaving that as is all the time. And then I'm using mode number 1 and number 3 to play around with, do some different stuff. But then I know that mode 2 is always going to be the exact same settings that I always use. And what I've done here is that I entered the smooth track on mode number 2, and that's set the pan to smooth track with a speed at medium, a deadband at 2, and sensitivity at medium. This is something that I think works really good for me to get those really cinematic, like moving shots without the motors being like too responsive when you're using the gimbal. Leaning in and out is something that is really easy to do, but it looks so good when you're like using a gimbal, because the shot is really steady and you feel like the moving subject is like whoa. So when you're leaning with the gimbal, like forward or backwards, you can also try to find something to shoot through. Because if you find some kind of like hole in a wall or a window or anything like that, it's gonna make your shot look so much better than if you're just moving in like that. This is something that is really cool to do in like ruins or urban environments. Maybe you have like a, I don't know, you can use that whatever kind of hole that you find. Sounded weird. Slide and pan is definitely a move that you can use no matter what kind of video that you're shooting, because it's so good. Like, it's literally one of the best moves that you can use, and that is holding your gimbal like this and then moving to either right or left, and then at the same time like turning your gimbal handle so that the camera is keeping like locked on the center, because that is going to give you like the circular movement that you're always like keeping the center point of the circle in focus. And this move is something that I use almost all the time, even when I'm shooting handheld, because it looks so good. Gonna make sure it's not falling over here. I do highly recommend you to go out and practice like the gimbal walk, or the, I don't know what you call it, like the video walk or something like that, a lot, because when you feel comfortable with that, there's like literally no limits to what you can shoot, because the smoother you are in your legs, the better your footage is gonna look. So when you combine walking smoothly with a gimbal and getting those kind of different moves in there, it's gonna look really good. For example, you can get a shot like this, leaning in and then walking slowly backwards with everything that you've learned in this video. And I mean, like, that shot looks really good. I wish it were a better environment, maybe a sunrise or something like that, but I mean, come on, like, it looked dope. And if you're walking behind a person, you want to try to move as slowly as possible so you don't get that up and down movement. And if you're shooting a static subject, then you want to try to have a foreground in that shot to make it feel really dynamic or revealing or establishing or something like that, because it's gonna get like, it's gonna look so much better when you include that into the videos. You can also use something that is called like the Inception thing, I think, and that is basically like this spinning around. Looks good, but I prefer doing those kind of shots entirely handheld instead. And those moves are everything that you need to know to get those really smooth gimbal shots, to make it look really professional and yeah, basically shoot whatever kind of cinematic footage that you want to do. So I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please do give it a thumbs up because it does make a huge difference, so thank you so much for that. If you haven't subscribed yet, that would be highly appreciated. It's not gonna be up here, it's gonna be down here. It's just a like call out. It looks good, right? Thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for all the support that I'm getting. I'm rather totally lost the words, but nej, det är underbart att ha er här. Så att ha det gött. Tack, hej.